So, 2 weeks ago, the Met Gala announced its theme for 2025, and I got excited because, well, I love me some black dandyism. But it also got me thinking about something else, which is how did this black style find itself at the center of a wave of violence that swept LA in the 1940s? Yes, folks, let's talk Zoot Suits. Distinguished by its supersized shoulder pads, oversized jackets, peg-leg pants, and dramatic silhouette, the Zoot Suit was more than just an eye-blasting style.
Jackson! What's jumping, chick?
For black and brown communities who often felt underrepresented and unheard, the Zoot Suit was a form of bold self-expression, a declaration of pride, if you will. Nobody knows exactly who originated it, but what's for sure is that it came out of 1930s Harlem. As big band trumpeter Harold Fox once said, it came right off the street and out of the ghetto. It's believed that the term Zoot was born out of jive talk, with jazzman Zutty Singleton even saying that the term, brought over from New Orleans, was patois for cute. See, the 1920s and 30s were a time of cultural explosion in the US, and Harlem was at the center of it. The Harlem Renaissance, i.e. the golden age of African American culture, made Harlem a creative hub, and in it, jazz music thrived, swing boomed, and fashion became bolder, brighter, and more glamorous. And because music and fashion often go hand in hand, it's no surprise really that in the big dance halls of Harlem, a new style emerged. Young black Lindy hoppers needed clothes that would not only look good, but allow them to pull off their acrobatic moves, so they started altering drape suits, popularized by the Duke of Windsor earlier in the decade, to move more freely. They'd buy suits 2 sizes too big in stores or gather hand-me-downs and tailor them into what would become the Zoot Suit. See, the narrow cuffs prevented tripping hazards, and the loose-fitting clothes allowed for the wild movements the Lindy demanded. And with the knob and shoes, patterned tie, and pork pie hat added later on, the Zoot Suit was a bold, flamboyant affirmation of oneself, especially in an era where black folks were, well, considered to be second-class citizens. The Zoot Suit dripped with cool, and young folks flocked to it because of that. Matter of fact, the moment the Zoot Suit was donned by the likes of Cab Calloway, Dizzy Gillespie, and Louis Armstrong, it spread like wildfire.
I've got a Zoot Suit with the wreath complete with the drapery and stuff. Come to look sharp enough, see my Sunday gown.
As art historian Robert Ferris Thompson points out, coolness can be worn as armor. It cushions social repression like protective wear intercepts physical harm. So, thanks to jazz greats, the Zoot Suit quickly spread to other parts of New York City and the West Coast, where it found a devoted following among Mexican Americans. See, the jazz district of Los Angeles was in full swing around that time, and many young black and Mexican Americans found meaning in jazz culture. Specifically, Duke Ellington's musical Jump for Joy, where while wearing Zoot Suits, its characters projected racial pride and criticized racism. Filipinos actually also identified with Ellington's anti-racist message, and thus, by the 1940s, Zoot Suits were worn by working-class black and brown folks across the country. For Filipinos, Mexican Americans, and black Americans, wearing a Zoot Suit was a form of rebellion, a refusal to be ignored, a way of claiming a space they weren't allowed to be in. Matter of fact, in the Southwest, the Zoot Suit, or tacuche as it was known in Spanish, was a big deal in that it came at a time when Mexicans and people of Mexican descent were not supposed to be seen. So for young Mexican Americans to, quote, stand in the street corner and announce their presence, this was a big deal. The Zoot Suit was so popular within the Mexican American community that it gained a devoted following among pachucos, or young folks who were interested in jazz and had their own slang. But this, my friends, became a problem. The popularity and boldness of the Zoot Suit made it a target, and because society at large would rather attack symbols than deal with complicated societal issues, well, that's how you get the Zoot Suit riots of 1943. See, in 1943, from June 3rd to June 8th, thousands of white servicemen and civilians assaulted black, Filipino, but especially Mexican American Zoot Suiters in what was perhaps, quote, the first time in American history that fashion was believed to be the cause of widespread civil unrest. But although known at the time and today as the Zoot Suit riots, the rioters weren't in fact black or brown Zoot Suiters. They were white US soldiers, white sailors, and white Los Angeles residents who were obviously driven by prejudice and viewed the Zoot Suit as the garment of delinquency. But why would they, you may be asking yourself? Well, for that we've got to rewind just a tad to 1942. That year, the War Production Board, an agency that regulated the production of goods during World War II, set limits on wool and other fabrics due to the war, and because the Zoot Suit required vast quantities of fabric, Wearing one was seen as un-American. Essentially, wartime rations on fabric turned the zoot suit into a treasonous symbol because it required a lot of material to assemble. It didn't even matter if you had owned one before the rationing. The zoot suit as a whole was seen as anti-patriotic. And because in LA, zoot suits were particularly popular among black and brown folks, it soon became affiliated with crime. See, Los Angeles' population had surged at the beginning of the 20th century, and along with it, so too did racial and ethnic tensions. City officials started talking about a Mexican-American crime wave despite no evidence of one. Newspapers started associating the zoot suit with Mexican gang affiliations, and rumors swirled about painting Pachucos as racists. And the tragic 1942 murder of 22-year-old Jose Diaz only made matters worse. To the police, it was a pretty open and shut case. They dismissed the untimely passing of this zoot suit-wearing farm worker as evidence of an immigrant crime wave and gang culture, which only added more fuel to the fire. Around that time, newspapers also started filling their headlines with zoot suit gangsters or zoot suit fracas to report crimes involving people with Spanish surnames. They didn't explicitly say Mexican, but everyone understood exactly what they meant by those expressions. In fact, in the months that followed the Sleepy Lagoon case, named so because Mr. Diaz's body was found near the Sleepy Lagoon reservoir, fights between white sailors and Pachucos occurred daily. Or really, it'd be more accurate to say that Pachucos were subject to violent, racist attacks simply because they wore zoot suits. And it all came to a head in June 1943, where a fight between sailors and Mexican-American zoot suiters launched the Zoot Suit riots. The riots were a series of fights and beatings. For over a week, white servicemen went hunting for anyone in a zoot suit, and although Mexican Americans made up the majority of the victims, white mobs went after black men and Filipinos as well. Really, the zoot suits were an excuse to, well, quite frankly, bash dark-skinned people. I mean, white sailors and soldiers didn't stop to measure coat length or cuff size on their victims. They were out there beating up black and brown folks regardless of what they wore. It was truly a white free-for-all. Off-duty officers were slashing zoot suits to ruins, sailors were stripping boys to their underwear, and soldiers were clubbing any dark-skinned man they could get their hands on. The Los Angeles Herald-Express even ran a story on how to de-zoot a zoot suitor. And not surprising, really, considering the police, the press, and Los Angelinos actually cheered on those white servicemen, really just going out of their way to essentially confirm that the motto "to protect and to serve" didn't apply equally to everybody. Yes, it's not for nothing that white civilians started partaking in the violence as well. After all, their heroes in blue were, so why couldn't they? It got so bad that when the Los Angeles mayor was asked whether the riots could be seen as Nazism due to the racial element, he blabbered a whole lot of nothing that essentially came down to, well, because all victims are American-born, you can't say that. What? As writer Chester Himes said, quote, "Los Angeles was at last being made safe for white people to do as they damned well pleased." And it wasn't just in Los Angeles either. Zoot suiters were attacked in San Diego, New York, Toronto. I mean, in Baltimore, the local police patrolled the Black District for zoot suiters. The city of Los Angeles had effectively created scapegoats and encouraged vigilantism as a solution. So from June 3rd to June 6th, the police largely looked on while white people indiscriminately beat up black and brown folks. But June 7th marked a turning point. When the white mob started making its way to the heart of Black Los Angeles, the blacks fought back. As journalist Lauren Miller said in an interview, "We were going to raise hell and see that anybody that came over in the Negro community looking around for any trouble was going to find plenty of it." 500 Latinos also came to fight alongside the black community in a beautiful show of solidarity, and thus on June 8th, after another night of violence, the military finally intervened. More than 100 Mexican Americans suffered serious injuries compared to 16 servicemen, and get this, over 500 Mexicans were charged with the crime during the riots compared to 0 servicemen. Yup, 0 zip zilch nada. All servicemen were eventually let go. No legal action was brought against the white servicemen who had initiated the riots or against the civilians who had participated in them, and no apology was given by the media who had really just fueled this insanity. What happened instead was that the the Los Angeles City Council banned the wearing of zoot suits. Yeah. A Times article titled "Ban on Freak Suits Studied by Councilmen" even reported that the LA City Council considered making wearing the zoot suit a jailable offense. Wild, wild, wild. In the aftermath of it all, though, many tried offering different explanations for the riots. Some pointed to lawlessness, others juvenile delinquency, and some even blamed swing music. But really, the answer was simple. It was racism. It's not for nothing that white zoot suiters were spared during the riots. Guess John, James, and Brian just didn't make for good villains, did they? Anyways, although the zoot suit craze faded in the 1950s, its echoes could still be seen here and there.
Zoot suit, Z-O-O-T-S-U-I-T, Breet, pleat, silk lapel, guns a-blazing straight to hell.
In 1964, it was the subject of the Who's First single. In 1979, playwright Luis Valdez debuted Zoot Suit, the first Chicano play on Broadway, and in the 80s, the zoot suit's shape was taken up by Japanese avant-garde designers. The neo-swing craze of the 90s also kept the suit in view, and in 2011, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art shelled out $80,000 for a rare 1940s zoot suit. Oh, and as for the zoot suit riots, they were only officially condemned on May 16, 2023 by the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. It was truly a dark chapter in LA history, well, history period. But rather than stay focused on what the media and society at large turned it into, I want to end on the zoot suit's significance in marginalized communities. Like jazz, the zoot suit symbolized a youthful and beautiful rebellion against a society intent on pushing its wearer down. It was born out of a very specific experience, the one of growing up poor and Black during a period of depression and war. And later, it bridged the gap between marginalized communities, what with Mexican Americans finding joy in its bold, suave style and consequently expressing themselves through it. To wear the zoot suit was to make a statement. It gave a voice to the disenfranchised, and in that regard is proof of the expressive power of fashion. And look, although society at large tried to taint the image of the zoot suit, here I am talking about it, and you know what? In 2025, some Met Gala attendee will probably honor it.